Now this video is part 2 out of this topic, the 25 things to know about the switch, about the switches. So if you haven't watched video number 1, part 1, go back and watch that video first. Now, if you already went through that video, and I get it, you know, like it took 40 minutes for me to go through a lot of content, but that's because I really want to take that time for me to go through each of the 25 things to know about switches. And that's because I really care that you get this topic really well, for you to see like the big picture, and obviously for you to process this topic about switches in a way that you can communicate this to someone else, in a way that you can probably teach this to someone else, in a way that you can market and sell this to someone else, because that's exactly what's gonna make you different from everyone else. And that's one of the reasons why they will give you the job, because you know how to communicate what you know. You know how to communicate the experience that you have in the IT field. So let's get right into it. And by the way, I'm gonna go through the first 12 really quick, because that's something that I already went through on video number 1, okay? So let's get right into it. So number 1, on video 1, we talk about that switches, you take the switch out of the box and it works, right? You take the switch, you put them in, you plug it in, and then you plug in a few end devices, computers, and those computers, they will be able to communicate with each other. So that's another way for you to see like what switches do, okay? And number 3, you know, switches read physical addresses, MAC addresses. Now that's something that I already went through and in detail on video number 1. So if you haven't watched that video, go back and watch video number 1. But now you know, switches, MAC addresses, physical addresses. Now, number 4, can be managed or unmanaged. And we talk about that too, right? You can go to Best Buy, you can get a switch that will probably cost you like, I don't know, $60, $80, and more likely that switch will be an unmanaged switch. But obviously the videos that I'm doing, it's for me to teach you about Cisco equipment, right? In this case, Cisco switches. Switches that you can manage. And obviously that's some other vendors like HP that have switches that you can manage as well, okay? So let's move on. So number 5, you know, I get it, like the switch works out of the box, but you can console into the switch, so you can configure that switch for you to use some of the features. And that's something that I will be talking in more detail in this video. You know, like VLANs, port security, ETHERCHANNEL, and a few others, okay? Now, the console port, that's basically this, right? And that's something that I already showed that to you. And that's basically, you know, for you to do that locally. But now we can, once we connect to it, we can configure, you know, that connection to do it remotely instead of locally through the console port. And that's by using 2 protocols. You know, you can use Telnet, not secure, or SSH. And you better know the port number of each one of them. If you don't know the port number, you better go back and study that. And that's not something for you to like, let me see if I can remember. No, that's something that right away you have to tell. You know, you need to know all of the ports. You know, I have a list that you need to know 32 ports. You know, like those ports, if there are TCP or UDP, and the port number. So these 2, they are TCP protocols, both. And both, well, not both. This one uses port 23. This one port 22. Okay? So again, that's something that you need to know really well. So let's keep moving. So number 5, and this is something probably that you thought about it, right? About switches. Well, Jorge, switches work on the layer 2 of the OSI model, and that's basically the data link layer. But again, right? If someone asks you that question, you know, can you tell me on what layer of the OSI model switches work? They are expecting, okay? They are expecting for you to know that. And if you answer that question, it's like, okay, and guess what? More likely everyone else, the other 10, 20 candidates, more likely they're gonna answer the same question. Well, how can you answer that question completely different? And obviously in a way that it's gonna differentiate you from everyone else. And one way for you to do that, that's a few ways. And by the way, I teach this in my coaching program, okay? Just to give some promotion. But one way is for you to be able to teach so they can see you as an expert. And you can do that when you basically say more about the topic that they ask you. In this case, and remember, this is something that I went through in detail on video 1. But you can say, oh, you know, like layer 2, the data link layer, that's basically where switches work. But let me tell you, there's other type of switches, and that's called layer 3 switches that work on the network layer of the OSI model. And by the way, that's the layer 3 of the OSI model, the network layer, because by the way, we have 7 layers. You know, all the one on the top, that's layer 7, that's more like the application. Then we have the presentation, the session, that we don't care that much, but then we're gonna go to the last 4, and that's more likely where we care, you know, like network engineers. So you see, same question, but I was able to provide more value on how I answer that question. And that's exactly what you need to do. And what I just give you right now, it's gold. Now, it's up to you if you want to do that. You know, if you think you know better, again, that's really up to you. I care about results. That's what I care the most, results. If you don't have the results, that's for you to step back and be like, okay, probably, I don't know, it's not like I know best, you know. I need to think and be open-minded and be like, okay, you know, let me find someone else, not just one, but few people that have the results that I want. And let me open my mind and listen to them, okay? Just some advice that works, okay? So, number 6, have different models. So, if you went through video number 1, you better know this by now. Not for you to, oh, let me remember. No, you better know this by now. Because yes, you can probably say a few technical things that you got out of some videos that you got out of the book. But if you're not able to say or to come up with some of the models of Cisco switches, guess what? Right away they're gonna see you, perceive you, think of you like, well, this guy or this girl is just based on book smart, or probably went through some YouTube videos and that's it. But has no knowledge really on the models out there. Like, really? Next. I don't like you? Next. That's exactly the way that they think. And I know because I talk to, you know, many recruiters. I talk to many managers. For the past 3 years, that's one thing that I've been doing a lot. Even before, you know, doing Network Engineer Academy. So I was able to pick their brain and be like, wow, now I see the way that you see things. And now that I know that, let me tell you, I can basically go through that process and having a conversation, go through the job interview process in a way that I'm gonna win because I know the way that they think. You see, this what I'm giving you is badass valuable content that you can use. Anyways, so going back here, right? So we have like that, and obviously you don't have to know all of the models, but you know that 2960s, 3560s, 3750s, the 4550s, and 6550s. And remember, on video number 1, I remember that I asked you a few questions, you know, and how will you answer those questions based on what's the difference between these two, and what's the difference between these two. And if you don't know the difference, and that's probably a few things that you can probably Google it, but that's just one more likely that will differentiate it the most. And you better know that. And I'm not going to tell you right now because I already went through that in video number 1. So go back if you haven't watched video number 1. So number 7, have an operating system. So obviously, if you want to, let's say, manage that computer, you know, for you to configure that computer, you obviously have to do something on the software, right? And that's basically because that computer has an operating system like Windows 7, Windows 8.1 or whatever, you know, Windows 10. So the same with switches, you know, they have an iOS. And that's basically what they call it. But you better know the version. You better know the version, you know? Like, yeah, you're probably really good at saying, oh, like, I've been working with Windows 7. You know, I'm old guy. You know, I go all the way back to Windows XP, you know, Windows, you know, Vista, you know? But, yeah, that's, and as if you want to work as a system admin, desktop support, you know, for a network engineer, you better know the versions of the iOS and switches and routers. And I'm not going to tell you one, the more up to date, and that's 15 point, and that's a few versions. But now you know 15 point, and that's a few out there, okay? Again, that's something that you better know. But most companies right now, they still work with the oldest version, 12.1, 2, 3, and a few others that they have. I told you. Okay. But go back and watch that video number 1 because I give you more info. Number 8, they have a MAC address table, a content addressable memory. Content addressable memory. You see, I got it right. Now let me tell you, okay, you don't have to memorize this. As long as you know, yes, switches have a CAM table, MAC address table, that's all that matters. No one is going to ask you what this stands for. No one is going to ask you that. No one is going to give you another $1 for you to know that, okay? So focus on what matters the most. And remember, this is a process, basically, that it goes the switch and how to manage, you know, the end connections is connected to the switch. You know, how many computers, okay, that computer, okay, what's the MAC address, okay, it's on port 20, and that basically goes and added to the MAC address table, and it's basically a 5-minute where that time they will be able to remember aging, basically what they call those MAC addresses if they're not that active. Well, anyways, I talk about that more in video 1, so let's keep going. So make smart forwarding decisions, obviously based on MAC addresses, based on the MAC address table. Okay, number 10, forward broadcast messages. And that's something that I'm not going to go in detail because I already told you in video 1. Just to remind you, you know, it's always good to remind yourself. The more ways that you can go through a topic, something, in different directions, the best, because the more your mind connects that information to different things that you know, that's how you will never ever forget that content, and you will always be able to communicate that to other people. Because if you don't get it right away or really well here in your mind, it's not going to be easy for you to communicate that to someone else, for you to be able to present that to someone else. I'm telling you, you know, I probably went through 10 minutes by now, but what I'm giving you, it's really gold. And by the way, that's exactly the way that I teach all of the topics on the membership site. So that should be a link on top or underneath this video. So make sure you go there and check exactly what we have to offer on the membership side. You know, it's the time for you to take your IT career to the next level, not just for you to be an average IT engineer. Because let me tell you, IT certifications, let me tell you one more time, IT certifications will not get you all the way to the top. They're not. Okay? And I have a lot to say about that. Yes, they will help you. Don't get me wrong. They will definitely help you, but not for you to go all the way to the top. Now, if you do it wrong by memorizing the questions, then that's more likely the reason why you cannot get a badass job in the IT field or a higher position. But you see, that's for another video. Let's come back. So, 11, frames. Data link layer, switches, frames, MAC addresses, right? That's something that you have to know. And obviously, that's something that I talk about on video number 1 about what's inside a frame, right? But go back on video number 1. And the last thing that I talk about on video number 1, you see, I don't know. I went through these 12 things in about 10 minutes, but on the other video, I went through the same 12 things and it took me 40 minutes. Why? Again, because I'm really giving you ways for you to connect this information and something that can make sense to you and something that you can process, for you to be able to communicate that to someone else, for you to be able to remember. Because if you're not be able to do that, what's the point really for you to go through information that you will forget? That's the reason why I do not believe on PowerPoint presentations. You know, also it has to do a lot with how they present the information to you. That's one. And the second one, how you process what you are learning. The other trainer can be a badass, but if you don't know how to process that, guess what? More likely you're not going to get as much as you wanted to. Because let me tell you, I learn a lot from other trainers. I do. I go through many video training courses. That's some resources that I use for me to like, okay, I get it. I get it more. I learned that. Okay, now let me process it in a way that's going to make more sense to me, in a way that I can also teach it to you. Okay? So let's now go to 13, and that's basically, I think this is new. Now we have switches, okay? So again, this is something new on video 2, part 2. So let's talk about this, okay? Switches. So switches have ports. Duh, Jorge, obviously. But let me tell you, right? There we used to have hubs. I haven't been in a company or people that I talk to that don't longer have any hubs, right? But probably if you're in the IT or you went through some training, you know what's a hub, right? It's exactly like a switch. You can look at it, right? That can be white, this box, and it says no Cisco, and probably you think, well, I don't know, maybe that's a switch, maybe that's a hub, right? So hubs, they're basically half duplex. And what that means, it's a port, okay? It's a port. So if someone asks me, Jorge, you know, like, can you tell me what's the difference between a switch having a half duplex and a full duplex connection? What would you say, Jorge? Now, let me ask you this question, because by the way, this is something basic. Okay, probably if this is completely new to you, I get it. Listen, okay, so you can process this information in a way that will be like, wow, now I get it, but I see it, and I know that I'm not going to remember, and I know how to answer a question like that because Jorge just teach me how to do that. Okay, but now if you've been through some training, you know, I know that you know What's a half duplex and a full duplex connection? So I go back to the same. Let's say that I'm the manager and I come up to you and I ask you, okay, like, can you tell me what's the difference between, a switch having a full duplex connection or a half duplex connection? What would you answer me? What would you answer me? Take a minute, pause the video. If you go through this exercise by taking a minute, 2 minutes, and pausing the video, you will be able to come back and compare the way that I'm going to answer the question. Because I know, and this is not because I'm really smart, but that's because I talk to many people, and I know that more likely you're going to answer the question exactly the same way that the other 10 people, the other 10 candidates are going to answer the question. And guess what? I'm not going to remember you. Why would I remember you? If you just answer that question exactly like the other 5 candidates that I just interviewed the past few days, and then more likely the next 5, they're going to answer the same way. So take a minute. Answer that question. Now, let's say that you are back, okay? So one way, that's obviously a few ways, but one way that I will answer that question, that same question, hey, Jorge, can you tell me on a switch what's the difference on having a half duplex or a full duplex connection? My answer will be something like this. Well, if you take a switch out of the box, obviously it works. You don't have to do anything with it. And by the way, those ports are by default full duplex. By default, you don't have no half duplex. Half duplex, by the way, that was like many, many years ago with hubs. All of the ports and hubs, like, dumb network devices, all of them, they were half duplex. And what that means is that hub before, it was like a huge collision domain, okay? A huge collision domain. But now with switches, now that you're talking about switches and you're talking about a full duplex and half duplex connection, what I can tell you is that each port and that switch is their own collision domain. So let's say if this switch up to here, forget about this, up to here, we have 48 ports, that means that we have 48 collisions. And again, you take the switch out of the box and it works, and by default, you don't have to do anything. All of the ports are in full duplex mode. But you can console into that switch, and if you want, I don't know the reason why, but if you want, you can configure one or as many as you want as a half duplex connection. And by the way, what that means, now going to technical, is that half duplex is just one way. It's like the walkie-talkie. That's just one guy is able to communicate. You have to wait for the other one to finish for you to be able to reply back. But with full duplex, it's just like a phone conversation. both can be talking. But more likely when 2 people are talking at the same time, that's because they're arguing, right? That's so funny. That came to my mind. But you see, I was fun. I was able to say a lot. I was not that technical. I was just like, you're just like me. You're my friend. Let's talk about this. That's exactly the way that you need to position yourself in front of them, okay? And this is just a few things that you will be able to learn, either through my coaching program or through the membership side. Again, I take the time to do this and the process, the psychology behind it, because I really care about you becoming a badass, a high-paid IT network or system engineer. Anyways, going back here, okay? So now you know better, okay? And when you go and show interface on the port, let's say, I don't know, port 2, and if you see a lot of collisions happening, now I'm being more technical. Basically what that is that probably on one end of that connection, it's a half duplex. And by the way, I'm going to retract what I was saying about it's a full duplex connection, because I know probably by now that someone typing underneath this video saying, Jorge, that's not true. I caught you. You're lying, because there's people like that, But I wish I can see their videos. I wish I can see their videos, because I know they're not going to post, any videos. One way for you to think that and another one for you to be able to teach it on camera. But anyways, so basically there are an auto configuration, okay? Auto, that means, let's say if that computer that I have, obviously more likely it's a full duplex connection, is gonna connect to the switch and it's gonna be a full duplex. But again, you can hard code that port for that to be full duplex. But yes, I remember that's auto, okay? It's auto. What that means, again, if that computer connects to it and that NIC card and that computer, it's full duplex, it will be full duplex. If it's half duplex, it will be half duplex, okay? So there, let's go to the next one. For team. So as you've been in the IT and you've been going through some training, as you know, when you connect a switch and a switch, you have to use a crossover cable. When you connect a router to a router, you need to use a crossover cable. But you see now switches are so smart that you don't have to do that no more, you know, because it's kind of hard just to find a crossover cable, you know, it's just there in the desk, you know. So basically they come up with this, the MDIX, auto MDIX, and basically that port will detect if I'm connected to the other switch, because if I'm connected to the other switch and if that cable is not a crossover cable, I'm gonna switch the pins, and that's exactly what the switch does, and that's basically called medium independent interface. So that's really neat, right? Like if you ask me, Jorge, you know, you're the manager and you ask me, Jorge, you know, like, it's that true that you need a crossover cable to connect to switches? Or what about if you ask me, you know, Jorge, what type of cable do you need for you to connect to switches? And I will be, you know, we can use obviously a crossover cable, but now switches out there, we can use a straight to cable, you know, and probably know that you were looking for the answer crossover. But let's be real, right, and technical. Like switches right now, they have this technology called MDIX. And that basically is they will detect if it's connected to another switch and if it's a straight through cable, and it will switch those pins and it will make it like a crossover cable. Bam! You see the way that I answered that question instead of you probably be, oh, you need a crossover cable. And that's it. They are expecting for you to answer that question. But what else can you say? They will see you like an expert. They will see you like, you know, that you have value to offer. So anyways, let's move on. So another thing that we have is VLANs. And I have a video, just a video that I talk about VLANs, okay? A really long video because I go in really in detail about VLANs. But VLANs basically is virtual local area networks. And what that means is that right now, by the way, and I think it's in the next one, so let me move to the next one. So you see we have by default, we have a native VLAN, okay? We have a native VLAN. And by the way, that native VLAN is VLAN number 1. What that means, you take that switch out of the box and you know, it works. And all of the ports on that switch, they belong on VLAN 1. So you don't have to do anything. They already belong on VLAN 1. And that VLAN 1 by default is that native VLAN. You see, if you ask me something about switches, I can just probably say, oh, you know, you can do some VLANs and switches. That's one thing that you can do. And then, by the way, you can do port security and blah, blah, blah. But you see, you just said VLANs. What else can you say about VLANs? I'm going to be like, whoa, you know, right? So it's basically saying, by the way, you take the switch out of the box and you know, it works. All ports will belong on VLAN number 1. And by the way, that VLAN number 1 is the native VLAN. And that's more likely something that you want to change later on because it's not secure. And we both know why, right? And then the other network engineer or manager obviously will say, yes, of course I know why. I get you, man. Obviously he's not going to say that, but their mind is going to be like, yeah, of course I know why. You see how you are influencing that process? This is so powerful. You really have no idea. Now, really quick, VLANs, right? So let's say here I have 24 ports. 12 and 12. Let's forget about those right now. So what I can do, I can move all of the ports. But first I need to create a VLAN, right? So let's say that I create a VLAN and I name it, you know, VLAN 100, and I name it, you know, the marketing VLAN. Well, not the marketing, because that will be too many people in the marketing department. You know, end users, let's say, you know, end users, just normal users, okay? Not executives, normal users. So I take these 12, okay, this 12, and I add it to a VLAN 100, you know, VLAN 100. So I basically take those ports and I put them on VLAN 100. So now they're not going to be able to communicate with the other computers that are connected. They're still connected on VLAN 1 until you do some routing. But that's, again, for another video. But basically, it's that, right? You take one big broadcast domain, because that's something that you know by now based on video number 1. And by the way, I hope you watch the 3 videos that I have on switches. I have 3 videos. You know, I know many people go on what's a switch and 1 video. I took 3 videos. I did 3 videos, you know, switches, part 1, part 2, and part 3. What I'm walking you through right now is the 25 things to know about switches. Another way for you to learn the topic. But I have 3 videos out there. part 1, part 2, and part 3 about switches. And I go in detail about what I'm walking you through right now. And I have another video just for VLANs. You know, because I really want you to go through this process and getting it through my videos and for you to forget about everything else. Because that will be more than enough for you to get it, for you to be able to process it, for you to be able to make it your own, and for you to go through the exercise and be like, yes, now I can communicate this to someone else. Now I can apply this. Now it makes sense to me. Now I see it. Now I can talk to probably another network manager, a network engineer. I can talk to a project manager about a project based on this topic. Bam! That's exactly what's going to make a difference. So let's keep going. Another thing for you to think about, you know, switches, now that you were saying about VLANs, or that I was saying about VLANs and about the native VLAN, it's trunking, right? And what that means is because now you don't have one switch in the company. You have a few switches, right? So you have a few switches. So you connect, let's say, 2 switches. Let's not make this a big deal. So you connect 2 switches. So at that point, you want those VLANs to communicate with each other, right? The end devices that belong on those VLANs and those switches to communicate with each other. From one switch, end devices, to the other end devices on the other switch. Well, that connection has to be configured as a trunking connection, okay? That way those VLANs can go through. So now you know. But you see, that's another thing that you need to think about switches. And probably this is something that you knew, like, yeah, Jorge, like, I know what's trunking, but probably that was something that you would have never said if someone asked you about switching, right? Because more likely what people answer, because I asked this to many people, you know, can you tell me what's a switch? Really basic, layer 2, data link layer, it's all about MAC addresses. No, they forward broadcast domains. You know, they have a MAC address, and that's about it. And I'm like, okay, let me ask that question to the next candidate. But wait, don't go anywhere. And you will see he's going to answer the same way. And by the way, now, both of you, don't go anywhere. Let me ask that question to the other candidate. And guess what? He's going to answer the same question exactly like you did. You see, and I can keep going on and on and on. And I think you have to go through that process for you to be amazed and like, wow, Jorge was telling me the truth. It's true that most people answer technical questions the same way. So that's no way for them to differentiate you. So let's move on because we still have a lot to go through. We are in just 17 and probably right now it's about 20 plus minutes. Okay, so trunking, again, you know, and this one is ISL. I completely forgot about what it stands for. I do not care because no one is going to pay me more money for me to know that because that's something that we don't use. So don't take the time to memorize something that you will never use. You can look smart right now and be like, oh, Jorge, let me tell it for you what that is. I don't care. I do not care. I focus on what's going to make me successful. Not some BS that probably someone else tell me to memorize and do when in reality I will never use, okay? Now, the one that more likely we'll be using, and by the way, this one is the one that Cisco owns, you know, through Cisco devices, in this case switches. This one, it's basically from IEEE, and that's basically the corporation company that provides like protocols for all vendors, okay? So they created this one for trunking. So if I want to plug in this Cisco switch with an HP switch, I can make that happen. You know, and this one is the 802.1q. That's it. I talk about it more on VLAN. 18, another thing for you to think about now that you're talking about trunking, it's about dynamic trunking protocol. And what that means is, again, you take the switch out of the box and it works. And by the way, all those ports are here, like in auto dynamic trunking protocol, and that's not good because if you connect a computer, you know, with some software out there, really easy, you can go to another YouTube, a YouTube video. I mean, you will be able to trunk, you know, that connection from your computer, not a switch, your computer, through that application and trunk into that switch. And guess what? You will be able to get all data because the switch thinks it's trunk into another switch. That's not good. And that's one of the reasons, and that security part, that you need to make those ports access ports, all of them access ports. Before I put that switch on the network, I'm gonna make it all of the ports access ports. The only ones that are gonna be trunking, that's basically the ones that will be connected to another switch. Whew. Now the other security thing that we need to talk about is obviously port security. So again, right, port security and switches. That's something that you need to say about when someone asks you about switches. Well, another thing that you can do that you can enable, it's basically port security. And there's a few things and how can you do that. Basically, you go and be like, you know, these 6 ports, you know, they're basically connected, you know, through the floor, through the building by the lobby, you know, through those network jacks by the lobby. So obviously, I don't want anybody for them to see like, oh, that's a network port, you know, so let me plug in my computer. right? Because then they're gonna be accessing your network. So you can go to this port and be like, you know, I'm not gonna, and that's because I know probably you will be like, oh, Jorge, but that's not really what happens and all this BS. Let me give you like the big picture, okay? I don't want to go into detail, but I really hate when people, they're trying to be a smart ass. Instead of you focusing on yourself, you're trying to make, you know, what other people provide value for you to find out and be like, you see, you're not that great, Jorge. I mean, come on, you focus on you, for you to be great, okay? But yes, you know, like those cables, when you see those on the buildings, they go all the way back to, let's say, that the server room, the MDF, and basically they go all the way to a patch panel. And from the patch panel, they go now to the switch. And let's say it's all the way there, you know, because the company that did that, they did what we asked, right? But we found out that those ports are the ones on the lobby. So I'm like, you know, those 6 ports, disable. So even if they plug it in, they're not gonna get no connection. The other thing that we can do too for the other, for all the end users is like, well, they only have one computer. That's it. They only have one computer. Some of the users have a computer and they have a laptop. So for more likely with the laptop, they're gonna be connected to the Wi-Fi. So let's do this. You know, let's configure each port to allow only 2 MAC addresses. Remember, MAC addresses don't change. So let's do that. So, you know, 2 MAC addresses, you know, can be connected on one port. If the third MAC address gets, if the port detects a third MAC addresses, we have a few options, and that one of them can be disable the port. And that will be no connection. And we'll know because the user was gonna call us and be like, hey, it's not, I'm unable to connect. And I'm gonna be like, oh, okay, let me get to the switch. I see that you connected another device. It's totally cool. I'm not gonna say anything if you buy me lunch, okay? So anyway, let's move on. Port 20, Ether channel. So in these cases, going back and when you connect one switch to another switch, right? That's only just one physical connection. But what about whatever happens on that physical connection? Then you're gonna have no connectivity between those 2 switches. So what you can do 2 physical connections, but you're gonna Ether channel those connections, physical connections, and basically it will be like the switch will see them as a one virtual connection, even though you see 2 physical connections from switch A to switch B. And that's basically Ether channel. And that's when you create those channels, and we have a few options for you to do that. So that's it. Let's keep moving on. Again, that's something else that I will say. Now, the other thing that you connect 2 switches, basically you can create some loops, broadcast storms, right? Because remember, switches forwards broadcast. So that broadcast is gonna go to the other switch, and that switch is gonna send it back to that switch. And it's just gonna be back and forth, and eventually there's gonna be too much that the network is gonna go down. Boom. You see? But that's the reason why we have a spanning tree protocol. And yes, it's something else. More likely we're gonna use rapid spanning tree protocol. But just get a picture. That's a technology out there that the switches can do by themselves. You don't have to do anything. Okay, so you plug in those 2 switches, you know, with 2 physical cables, and you have them configure Ether channel. So the switches will see these 2 connections as 2 different connections because you haven't do Ether channel, right? When you do Ether channel, basically you bundle them as one virtual. So that switch sees them, those 2 connections, as one virtual, right? So that's no loop because it's just one connection. But when the switch sees them as 2, then at that point it's gonna go through this process and it's gonna disable one of those ports. That way it's gonna stop that loop or broadcast storm. Okay, now it's good for you to know if something happens, for you to detect, oh, that what happened was based on a spanning tree protocol issue. Or you know that you have now 4 switches and you see which one is the main one that's basically holding what they call the root switch based on STP. You can log in and be like, you know, this is not the best switch for that switch to be the root bridge. Or based on VLANs too. You see, I'm talking all technical now based on the CCNA, CCNP. Anyway, so let's go back on the simple spanning tree protocol. Now let's move on because I want to go through this video quick. So the other thing that we have is power over Ethernet. A lot of the switches right now have that, power over Ethernet. You know, and let me show you one of the switches that I showed you the other day. And let me find out where it says PoE. You know, it usually says on the top. You know, I don't see this one. It says it's a PoE. I think it is. You know, it must be. I have worked with this, so yes. So PoE, what that is? It's basically like 2 things that right away should cross your mind. One of them is the access points. You know, you probably, if you go through where you work, and let's say you still you don't work in the IT, that's something that you're working right now to get your first job, but probably the job that you have right now, depending obviously if it's in an office, you will see on the ceiling those kind of like a square white boxes, and those are the access points, you know, for wireless. And that basically gets power once that access point, it gets connected through the network cable to one of the switches that support power over Ethernet, because that's basically what it gives. It gets power over the Ethernet, that's the network cable. You know, the other devices, obviously voice over IP. You know, you have those Cisco, and obviously there's more vendors, they have, they go over IP, the voice. So basically you have the phone, and what you do, you connect the phone, you know, to the switch, and then the computer that you have, you connect it to the back of the phone. And that phone is gonna turn on based on this. Why? Because that port, again, it supports power over Ethernet. So that's really good stuff, okay? So let's move on, okay? And this one it says here, but I didn't want it to show you because maybe it doesn't see really well. But it says PoE, power over Ethernet. So let's go, 3 more. Can be fixed or can be modular. Can be fixed or can be modular. What that means is, you know, when I go back on the modules like the 2960s, the 3550s, 3750s, that's basically just fixed switches. You know, I pay $5,000 brand new, $7,000 on one of the Cisco switches. They're great. I like them, you know, but I'm like, man, I forgot that the company will grow, so I'm going to have to order another switch, and I'm going to spend another $7,000. Why? Because I cannot add more ports to that specific switch. The switch that I just showed you, and also this one, is just fixed. But you see, when you go higher, that some of the switches, they are modular, and that's because you can add. You know, if you go with the 600s, 400s, I think too. 4,000s, not hundreds, my bad, because then someone else is going to write down, Jorge, we don't have switches there for hundreds, man, what's going on? Okay, so 4,000s, okay, you can add more, a modular switch into it. Google it right now and go on images, you know, put Cisco switches, 4,000s modulars, and you will see, and you will get it once you see it, okay? So 24, we have NEXUS switches, okay? And that's for data centers. Now, do you know some of the models? And this is something that I seen that happening, that every company, they have now like just normal switches, Cisco, and then they start getting that NEXUS switches. And obviously those are more faster, and more likely those, you will find them on the data center. But I see them also on the offices, and some obviously big companies, but in offices, not just in data centers. And that's models all the way from 1,000 all the way to 9,000. You know, 2,000, 3,000, 7,000. You know, I have worked on one project with 7,000 NEXUS switches. It was really badass. Now, that commands, they're not the same. I know that's so weird, right? Like the commands for a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, they're not the same. They look the same. You know, if you know how to do something in a normal switch, you will be able to figure that out on that NEXUS switch. But yeah, that's kind of like wow, you know, Cisco, same company, now the same exactly same commands, you know, who knew? But anyways, so you need to know that, right? If someone asks you about switches, oh, and by the way, we have NEXUS switches, you know, and but that's more likely for high speed data connection. So that's more likely what you will find in data centers. And some of the models that I can tell you is like, you know, the 2,000s, 3,000s, 7,000s, whatever. You see, you're giving more information that they were not expecting. But because now you come up with something related of what they ask you, guess what? They're going to see you like a badass. Okay? And the last one, STACKWISE. Every company that I work for, every company so far, they have this. Now, if you want to be a network admin, and more likely, and obviously a badass network engineer, that's something that you more likely do probably depending on how the company is, or how the company is big, you know, probably once every 3 months, once every 6 months, once a year, but you need to know that. Now, STACKWISE, that's basically how you see here. We have 4 physical switches, okay? And we are connected in the back. In front of it, that's where we have the ports. Now, what's the big thing or big deal about this? That we can manage these 4 physical switches as one. So one IP for management to connect and configure them as one instead of just one by one. And that's exactly what they do. And that's basically a specific model for you to do that. And that's exactly the switch that I have here. Okay, I will show you right there. Right there, stacked. We have 1 and 2. Okay, and that's the 3750s models that you can do STACKWISE. And I believe those are more expensive than the 2960s, the 3550s. Again, depending where you buy it and all these good things. Okay, but yes, that's something that you better know how to do. And by the way, I go through this process and configuring this. That's something that I'm working right now when I'm filming this video. Probably by the time that you watch this video, because I don't know when you're going to be watching this video, it's already there on the membership side. I go very detail oriented because I really want to expose you and what will you see in real life. That's it. That's all I have. And I want to make this video another 40 minutes like the other video, but I wanted to make sure to give you a lot of value for you to now to think and be like, okay, now that I went through 25 things, how can I make this my own? And let me go through this process and thinking like someone is going to ask me something about switches. So how can I answer that question, you know, in a way that's going to differentiate me from everyone else? Keep watching all of my videos and you will get it. You will see it. You will be different than everyone else. You will become a maven engineer. Again, my name, Jorge Armando Navarro. The only thing that I'm going to ask you is for you to share the video, like the video, comment on the video, because it really takes time for me to do this content. You know, I'm always thinking how to give you the best content out there. So that's it. And go to the next video about routers, 25, I think, 26 things, 24 things about routers. I forgot the number. But go to that video and I will talk to you there.